Last weekend, I had the opportunity to film the Savannah Bananas playing in their first ever NFL stadium, and it was amazing. Let's go! I am inside of Raymond James Stadium right now. We are about to film the Savannah Bananas, first game in an NFL stadium. I'm super excited, obviously because it is first game in an NFL stadium, but also we got a brand new FX3. So yeah, I was super fired up about the Sony FX3, and one of the reasons I was super excited to film on the FX3 was because it has the ability to shoot in 4K 120 frames a second, which is just so good for sports videographers. So what's up everybody? My name's Zach, I am a sports videographer, and in this video I want to talk about frame rates. What frame rate should you be shooting in for sports videography, in which scenario, and more importantly, how do you edit your footage after the fact to make the slow-mo actually look good. So what is your frame rate? Think about video as a series of pictures. I actually got started into videography and filmmaking by doing Lego stop motion animations, and that's a really good way to understand frame rate, because when you're doing Lego animations, you're taking a bunch of pictures and playing it back really quickly to make it look like your Lego characters are moving. And that is essentially what frame rate is. So cameras have multiple frame rates. It could be 24 frames a second, 30 frames a second, 60, or in higher end cameras like the FX3, 120 frames a second. And basically what that means is whatever your frame rate is how many pictures your video is going to be made up of. So if I am shooting a video that is 30 frames a second, that means in 1 second of the video, I will have 30 unique frames that make up that video. And the way that we see video is in 30 frames a second. So if you're scrolling on Instagram or TikTok, the videos are most likely going to be played back in 30 frames a second. That's just what looks natural to the eye. What frame rates should you be shooting in for sports videography? So in a hypothetical world, if you have a camera that can shoot 4K 120, that is going to be really great for gameplay, for getting those cinematic shots of the big moments. You know, I always think about the Saquon Barkley touchdown where he's banging the helmet and the snow's falling down. That is such a beautiful shot. And if I had to guess, that most likely was filmed in 120 frames a second because of how slowly they were able to slow it down. So I would recommend for sports videography, if you're trying to get those heroic, cinematic, super slow-mo shots, you almost always want to be shooting in 120 frames a second. Now, there are some downsides to that. It's going to eat up your card space a lot because those files are going to be massive. And even during the Bananas game in Tampa, by about the 8th inning, I had to switch to shooting in 60 frames a second just because I was running out of storage on my last card, and I didn't want to risk not being able to film because I had run out of space. So space is definitely going to be an issue. But I would recommend, if you're able to, and if you have the storage, definitely shoot 120 frames a second for your just like gameplay, because it's going to make everything look super pretty when you slow it down. Pre-game, I like to shoot 60 frames a second. Most of the stuff pre-game, you're never going to really use actually in slow-mo. You know, if someone's giving a pre-game speech, you're not going to slow down the speech like, "Let's go team." That doesn't really make sense. But if they have a really great cheer afterwards, I would love to hear "Let's go team," and then have it slow down into, you know, that hero shot of everyone going crazy in the huddle. So sometimes it's nice to have that ability, but you don't need to waste the card space to have that full 120 frames a second. So let's dive into the editing software. I'm going to show you how to edit your frame rate. So now that you know how to shoot it, we're going to edit it. So basically, whatever you shoot in, the higher the frame rate you're shooting in, the more slow you're going to be able to get it in post. So let's dive into Adobe Premiere. We're in Premiere now, and I have this shot right here of Coach Rack doing a backflip catch. And if you look at the frame rate right here, you can see that it is in 120 frames a second. And the big mistake people would make would be to right click on this and come down here, new sequence from clip. Now when I do that, I'm actually not going to be able to slow down this clip at all, because this clip is in a sequence that is the same settings as the clip, which is 120 frames a second, which means I know, oh, at 120 frames a second, I should be able to slow it down. So when I go in and try to slow it down super slow, it's going to play back all weird, which is not what I want. We're going to also mute my laptop. So instead what we want to do is we want to create a custom sequence. So if we come up here into Premiere, we're going to go into File, and then we're going to pop into New Sequence. And this is the key. No matter what editing your software you're in, this is the key. You want to create a custom sequence, a custom timeline that is the correct frame rate to make your slow motion work. So I have a lot of custom ones, but we're gonna just go in here to HD and actually adjust one. So well, you see we have all these drop-down menu options, and these give you a bunch of different frame rates. And you'll notice there's not an option for 120 frames a second, which if you're a beginner, you might be like, oh my gosh, I shot this shot in 120, why can't I edit it in 120? You don't want to edit it in 120 because you want to edit it in the lowest possible frame rate so that you can slow it down the furthest. So for the sake of the example, I'm going to put it in a 30 frames per second timeline. That way, if I'm putting it on Instagram, it plays back smoother. If I was making a movie, I would do a 24 frames per second timeline. And you may notice that I said 30 frames per second, but it actually says 29.97. That is something super complicated and super nerdy that really isn't gonna affect this tutorial. So for the sake of the video, we're gonna round that up to 30 frames a second. So now we have our sequence in 30 frames a second. In our settings, we can just come in here, make sure everything's right. Horizontal, 1920 by 1080, square pixels, blah, 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 all that good stuff. Only other thing I'm gonna do is I'm gonna change my codec to ProRes 444 so we can get the most out of our colors. And we'll just call this tutorial. And there we go. So now we can drag our shot of rack into our timeline. So we have our shot right here and we can slide it in just like that. We can scale it just like so. So now when we come in here, we can select our in and out points where we're gonna wanna actually, have the video go in slow-mo. So we probably want it to start right about here when we get into focus, just like that. So when I play it back in our 30 frames per second timeline, you'll see it's playing back in normal speed and I wanna slow it down. And the way you can figure out how much you can slow it down is just simple math. If you remember in elementary school, you learned ratios. Think of it as a ratio. So my clip is 120 frames a second and my timeline is 30 frames a second. And if I want to make that 120 frames a second clip 30 frames a second, what percentage of that is it going to be? And the nice thing is that when you're in a 30 frames a second timeline, since they are all increments, it's pretty easy to know. That means I can slow this down 25% speed and still get that same effect. So if I come into Premiere, into my retime, and you put it into 25%, and then just like that, it will get into our slow-mo, just like so. And now you can see that super smooth slow motion, just like that. Let's pop some color on this real quick. And bada bing, this shot is colored. And if you wanna learn how to color grade, you're gonna have to follow me on Instagram. We're getting really close, but I've been saying for the longest time now that I'm gonna drop a color grading tutorial once I hit 1,000 followers on Instagram. That's still the case. We are getting so close. And I am so excited because I really wanna drop this tutorial. And when I drop the color grading tutorial, it'll be everything. It'll be absolutely everything I know. It's gonna be a super long video, super in depth. You're not gonna wanna miss it. So please follow me over there. Now you can see what our clip looks like in our slow-mo with some color on it. So you can see Rack backs up and he jumps and boom, he hits the backflip and it's pretty sick. At this point, he holds up the glove, takes a step, gives the crowd a kiss, just like that. Boom, we'll probably cut that right about there because I know it's about to go out of focus in just a moment. And then we can pick the shot back up right here when he runs off the field. And that is a pretty cool sequence of slow-mo. So I drug another clip into the timeline while we were here. So this clip is of KJ Jackson pregame. I already went ahead and colored it. And this clip, when we come in here, you can see the name of it is Kyle Jackson walking onto the field. So when I come in here, search Kyle Jackson walking onto the field, you'll see the frame rate is 59, or again, 60 frames a second. So that means that I cannot slow this down 25% because if I slow it down to 25%, I don't have enough frames since this shot wasn't shot in 120 frames a second. And you're gonna see it looks super choppy. That doesn't look right. That's not what we want. So we'll Command Z, get out of that, and let's see what we'd have to do. So we have 60 frames and we're in a 30 frame per second timeline. Real easy math. We can slow this shot down 50%. And watch what's gonna happen to the shot compared to the adjustment layers when I slow it down. So we hit Command R to slow it down, 50%, boom, and you'll actually see what happens. Since the shot has 60 frames, it now takes up double the amount of space that it had beforehand. And you can see the adjustment layers basically prove that to us. So we can just take those and drag them along. And now we get that super slow-mo cinematic shot of KJ walking across the field. Just like so. And that is pretty much the key to slow-mo footage. You wanna make sure that you are editing in a timeline that is less frames a second than what you shot in. And you want to make sure that when you take the shot that has a lot of frames a second, you slow it down to the correct speed. Now you can always slow it down less, you know, so for example, if I'm like, oh, this is a little slow and I'm trying to cut to the beat, maybe instead of cutting him down to 50 frames per second, which would be using all 60 frames, what if instead I only make him go 75% speed? You'll see that totally works because we're not using more frames than we have. We're just condensing some of the frames just like that, and that still looks super natural. So there you go, that is the tutorial. I hope you guys can take something out of that. I feel like I talked a lot to basically just say make sure your timelines are set up correctly, but it's something that I see a lot of beginners make the mistake. I even had someone DM me on Instagram a few weeks ago asking pretty much the same question, so I hope this tutorial is helpful. If it was helpful for you, please let me know in the comments. You know, I'm trying to grow a community of sports videographers, of people who are passionate about cinematography, editing, color grading, and just kind of creating a community where we can all learn, thrive, and work off each other. But yeah, that's gonna be it for this video. Like I mentioned, follow me on Instagram if you're interested in learning how I color grade and just seeing cool shots that I get, because I post a lot of shots there, and once I reach 1,000 followers, like I said, I will be posting a very in-depth color grading tutorial that you're not gonna wanna miss. That's gonna be it for this one though. I appreciate you guys taking the time to watch. I'll talk to you all again in the next video.